Rome Series, Episode 4. We covered Caesar, who broke the Republic to rule it; Augustus, who replaced it with a performance; Caligula, what happens when power has no limits; today, the man who tried to save the Republic by killing the one person who might have been the only one who could, and spent the rest of his short life discovering he was wrong. When Julius Caesar saw Brutus among the men stabbing him, he stopped fighting. He had been defending himself, pushing men away, grabbing at arms, and then he saw the face of the man he had pardoned, promoted, trusted, and by some ancient accounts, loved as a son, and he stopped. He pulled his toga over his face, and he let them finish. That single detail, a man who survived everything choosing not to survive this, tells you more about the relationship between Caesar and Brutus than anything else in the historical record. Brutus did not just kill a dictator on the Ides of March. He killed someone who trusted him completely, and he believed, genuinely sincerely until his dying breath, that it was the right thing to do. This is the story of Marcus Junius Brutus, the man who loved Caesar and killed him anyway, and was destroyed by both things simultaneously. Marcus Junius Brutus was born around 85 BC into one of Rome's most politically significant families. His ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, was the man who had driven out Rome's last king 5 centuries earlier and founded the Republic itself. That name was not just a family legacy. It was a political inheritance, a set of expectations so heavy that Brutus spent his entire life either living up to them or being crushed by them. And here is the contradiction that defines everything about him. The man who killed his father, Brutus's father, was Pompey the Great, not Caesar, Pompey. The man whom many considered the champion of the Republic against Caesar's tyranny was the man who had murdered Brutus's own father. By every personal calculation, Brutus should have sided with Caesar. Caesar was his mother's longtime protector. Caesar had shown him nothing but favor and kindness. When the civil war came and Brutus had to choose, he chose Pompey, not from personal loyalty, not from gratitude, because Pompey represented the Senate's authority over one man's ambition. And for Brutus, that principle outweighed everything personal, every time. That was both his greatest quality and the thing that made him impossible to be around. Brutus did not invent the conspiracy, he was recruited into it. The primary instigator, by most ancient accounts, was Gaius Cassius Longinus. Cassius had personal grievances against Caesar that Brutus did not share. He was passed over for honors he believed he deserved. He resented what he saw as Caesar's contempt for the Senate. He had the motivation of wounded pride, where Brutus had only the motivation of principle. But Cassius understood something politically crucial. A conspiracy against Caesar without Brutus was a group of ambitious senators settling personal scores. A conspiracy with Brutus was a principled act of republican defense. Brutus's name was the difference between assassination and liberation, so Cassius worked on him, left anonymous notes in Brutus's chair quoting his ancestors' expulsion of the kings, had graffiti written on statues calling on Brutus to remember who he was. Plutarch records that Brutus was reluctant, that he agonized, that he barely slept in the weeks before the Ides, and that his wife Portia, sensing something was deeply wrong, cut her own thigh with a dagger to prove she could keep a secret, and demanded to know what was destroying him. Here is what Brutus actually believed. And it matters to understand this clearly, because the easy version of his story makes him either a naive fool or a cynical self-server, and the historical record supports neither. Brutus genuinely believed in the Roman Republic as a system of governance, not as an abstraction, not as a political talking point, as the thing that prevented any single man from becoming a tyrant over everyone else. He had read Plato, he studied Stoic philosophy, he corresponded with Cicero, Rome's greatest living advocate for republican values, and he had watched Caesar. a man he admired, possibly loved, accumulate power beyond any constitutional framework. He had watched Augustus, Caesar's heir, build on that. He could see where it was going. More importantly, he knew that if he did nothing, the Republic would end quietly and nobody would ever try to stop it again. He was not wrong about that analysis. What he was wrong about, catastrophically, irreversibly wrong, was what would happen after. The morning of March 15th, 44 BC, ancient sources record that Brutus barely slept, that Portia was so anxious she kept sending servants to the Senate to get news, that Brutus himself was so pale at breakfast that his friends remarked on it. He knew what he was about to do. He knew there was no version of this that left him unchanged. He had also made one decision the night before that historians debate to this day. He had argued successfully against killing Mark Antony alongside Caesar. Cassius wanted Antony dead. Antony was Caesar's closest ally, a brilliant and dangerous man who would certainly seek revenge. Brutus refused, partly on principle. He wanted this to be a surgical removal of tyranny, not a general purge. Partly because he believed Antony could be brought around to republican values once Caesar was gone. He was wrong about this in the most catastrophic way possible. But on the morning of the Ides, he dressed, said farewell to Portia, who was now shaking visibly with suppressed terror, and walked to the theatre of Pompey. Here is the question, and I want you to answer it personally, not historically. Brutus had a genuine friendship with Caesar. Caesar had pardoned him, promoted him, trusted him, shown him extraordinary personal kindness. And Brutus killed him because he believed sincerely, completely, after months of agonized deliberation, that it was the only way to save something larger than either of them. Have you ever had to hurt someone you genuinely cared about because you believed it was the right thing to do? Not the easy thing, not the thing that served you, the thing you believed was actually right, even though it cost you the relationship and the person's trust and maybe their opinion of you forever. Because that is what Brutus did, at the scale of an empire. And the question of whether he was right is a different question from the question of whether you understand why he did it. I think most people understand why, even when they think he was wrong. Comment principle. If you think he made the right choice, comment betrayal. If you think no principle justifies what he did to a man who trusted him, I want to know where you land. The conspirators had a plan to kill Caesar. They had no plan for what came after. This is the detail that damns Brutus more than anything else in the historical record, not the killing itself, but the extraordinary political naivety of what followed it. They walked out of the theatre of Pompey with blood on their togas and expected Rome to celebrate. They called themselves the liberators. Rome called them assassins. When Mark Antony read Caesar's will in the Forum, revealing Caesar had left money to every Roman citizen, had left his gardens as a public park, the crowd's grief turned to fury in real time. The conspirators were driven from Rome by a mob. Brutus gave a speech in the Forum defending what they had done. Plutarch records that the crowd listened in silence and then went to burn down the conspirators' houses. The silence that preceded the burning was the moment Brutus understood that the world he had believed in, the Rome that would receive the removal of a tyrant with gratitude, did not exist. It had not existed for a long time, and he had killed his friend to save it. While Brutus was in exile trying to build an army against Antony and Octavian, Portia was in Rome, alone. Ancient sources record that she became increasingly ill in the months after the assassination, whether from grief, from anxiety about Brutus's safety, or from the particular misery of a woman of extraordinary intelligence and courage who had been left behind while the world's fate was being decided elsewhere. She died in 43 BC. Some ancient sources record that she died by swallowing hot coals, a method of suicide that fits the extreme deliberateness that characterized everything she did in life. Other sources dispute this detail. What is not disputed is that she died, and that Brutus received the news while he was in camp preparing for the battle that would decide everything. Cicero's letters to Brutus from this period show a man who had lost the one person who had known the full weight of what he carried. He had shared his most dangerous secret with her. She had proven she could carry it by cutting her own leg open, and now she was gone, and the battle was coming, and he was alone with what he had done. The final battle came at Philippi in northern Greece in October 42 BC, 18 months after the Ides of March. Brutus and Cassius against Antony and Octavian. It was fought in 2 engagements on the same day. Cassius's forces were defeated by Antony. Cassius, wrongly believing Brutus had also lost, killed himself. Brutus's forces had actually won their engagement against Octavian. But when Brutus learned Cassius was dead and the overall battle was lost, he consolidated what remained and prepared for a second engagement 3 weeks later. He was defeated. His army dissolved around him. On October 23, 42 BC, Marcus Junius Brutus died on his own sword, held by a friend because he asked not to die alone. He was approximately 43 years old. Antony, when he found the body, wrapped it in his finest purple cloak. Plutarch records that Antony said Brutus was the only one of the conspirators who killed Caesar not from personal hatred or ambition, but from genuine belief in the Republic's cause. That tribute from his greatest enemy may be the most honest assessment of Brutus ever recorded, and it came too late to matter. My answer to the question I asked you at the midpoint, principle or betrayal. My honest verdict, both, and neither in the way that lets you feel comfortable with either answer. Brutus was right about Caesar. The Republic was dying, one man's power was replacing 5 centuries of collective governance. His diagnosis was accurate, his prescription was wrong in a way so complete that it accelerated everything he was trying to prevent. By killing Caesar, the conspirators did not restore the Republic. They triggered the civil war that produced Augustus, which produced Caligula, which produced a line of emperors that would last in various forms for 1400 years. The Republic Brutus killed Caesar to save was gone within 15 years of his death. And yet, Antony's tribute stands. Brutus was the only one who did it for the right reasons, and in a story full of men who served their own ambition while speaking the language of principle, a man who genuinely believed what he said and paid for it with everything he had is not nothing. He was wrong, he was sincere. He was destroyed by the gap between those two things, and that, the gap between sincere conviction and catastrophic consequence, is the most human story in the entire history of Rome. Subscribe to Powerlines, where power, history, and the human cost of both come together, and drop your verdict, principle or betrayal, in the comments. Because 2,000 years later, this argument is still not settled.